Hello and welcome to the Sonic Cinema podcast. My name is Brian Scuttle. Thank you for joining me at www.sonic-cinema.com, as well as the Sonic Cinema podcast YouTube channel. You can also check us out on Apple, Google, Spotify, wherever you listen to podcasts. That is the Sonic Cinema podcast. Please subscribe, follow, rate, and review wherever you can. We've got some really great shows coming up in the summer. I've got some really great guests. It's going to be a lot of fun to talk to some of these people about the subjects that we're talking about. And that's going to be all with the Sonic Cinema podcast. You can also check me out at patreon.com/Sonic Cinema. Admittedly, this year has been a bit crazy as far as being delayed on getting some of those originals for Patreons out there, but I will be working on that as the summer goes on, and that's at patreon.com/Sonic Cinema. So last year, we began a new little mini-series for the Sonic Cinema podcast, the Established Classic series. And what I mean by that is basically movies where the reputation, where just the very name of the movie just seems to be synonymous with greatness. Like, you hear this movie's title, you don't necessarily question the greatness of the movie. Does that still hold up? I mean, I think the six films that we talked about last year, I think very much do in a lot of ways. The three we are going to talk about today, I think very much do. Join me as he did last year for those episodes is actor Timothy J. Cox. Tim, thank you very much for joining me again.
Thank you, Brian. It's a pleasure to be back.
One of the things that I've done in basically setting up these trios of movies is I want to talk about movies that pretty much have are universally beloved. They're not ones where there's something problematic or questionable, controversial about them, like Gone with the Wind. But they're movies from basically the Hollywood golden age, basically from the 30s to 1960, where just Hollywood seemed to be firing on all cylinders when it came to writing, directing, acting, and just really making populous movies. And is one of the things I made a specific decision to when I chose at least two of the three films that we're talking about today is I wanted to delve into some of the more genuinely entertaining movies. It's not to say stuff like Casablanca or Sunset Boulevard is not entertaining, but they're also rather serious. And we're going to go ahead and start off with the earliest one to come out, and that is Howard Hawks' Bringing Up Baby, which came out in 1938. It is a screwball romantic comedy, has just tremendous work by Cary Grant and Katharine Hepburn, and this one I know is one my mom introduced me to way back in the day, and it's just one that is just such an absolute delight. Tim, let's go ahead and start with you though, as far as talking about this movie.
I think this movie is gold standard for screwball comedies. It really is. I mean, it's if you ever hear a discussion of anybody talking about the zany comedies of Jerry Lewis or Jim Carrey or anyone like that, it all springs from the tree of Howard Hawks, and especially this movie of Bringing Up Baby. The first time I saw it was 30 odd years ago, and I just, you figure, you watch a movie from 1938, you may not, all right, I'll watch it. I've heard it's a classic. It has, but you don't expect to really laugh, it's something. And this, it is genuinely funny. And it's just like you said, Brian, they were just back at that time in the 30s up until, start of the 1960s. They just released a bunch of films that just the quality of the writing and the performances and the directing and the innovations with cinematography and editing. This film has all of that. just the rat-a-tat-tat of the
Mm-hmm.
delivery. His thing was always faster is funnier, and revisiting it again, it holds up still very, very, very well, and it's still just the gold standard of not only screwball comedy, but I think of many comedies like Some Like It Hot, or all of the comedies that have come from like I said, Jim Carrey and Jerry Lewis,
Mm-hmm.
and it's just, and of course the thing that really makes the movie work is the pairing of Cary Grant and Katharine Hepburn, who were just magic, like they would be 2 years from now in the Philadelphia Story. They just have that. There's that certain thing that you just see on camera. It's that chemistry that they could just do no wrong in each other's company.
Yeah, it's funny. I'm still relatively, I'm still probably a novice when it comes to Katharine Hepburn, but it's like the two movies I'm most familiar with her with are this and The Lion and Winter, the
Mm.
movie she did with Peter O'Toole, and it's funny to see both. It's you're talking about two dramatically different types of narratives. You're talking about a screwball romantic comedy. Here you're talking about a historical drama in Lion and Winter.
But in The Lion and Winter, I should say that there are moments where she just that acid-tongued
Mm-hmm.
Eleanor of Aquitaine, where that dry Katharine Hepburn comic delivery comes out. And of course also it's exactly 30 years, 30-year difference
Yeah.
between both movies.
Yeah, that's exactly what it was getting to because of the fact that it's like the way that Hepburn is able to transmit some of transfer some of her the way she delivers lines here, the way she goes for the laughs, but also the way that those what am I trying to say? The way that delivery also really reveals a lot about the character. The way that transfers between the two films, I think, is really interesting, and it
Sure.
really does make it exciting. Well, and then there's the African Queen that she did with Bogart as well, which
Hmm.
I've seen. I forgot about that, which is a different type of romantic movie. It's a romantic
Sure.
adventure, but we're going to be talking about Bogart a little bit later here. Um, you know, I love that the thing. Most people when they bring up Howard Hawks comedies, most people I think inevitably go towards Is Girl Friday more.
Hmm.
Uh, and certainly it's a wonderful film. It's a wonderful film. It's a funny film. But I do think it does come down to the pairing of Hepburn and Grant here
Hmm.
is what I think makes this one just a bit more special. And the thing that is absolutely wonderful about this is that from the moment she is on screen, Katharine Hepburn is just chaos personified in this film. Like
Yeah.
you can tell with every scene that you see her with Cary Grant that like just everything else is just the way that everything is going to unfold and snowball and build up. It's like a snowball turns into an avalanche, and it's just absolutely insane. But it's also absolutely wonderful.
And the thing about, this movie and His Girl Friday is that one thing that Hawks did is that he never had the performers play for laughs. They play Cary Grant and Katharine Hepburn and Cary Grant and Rosalind Russell in both of those pictures. They played these characters as if they were playing Hamlet. And that's what makes it funny, even
Yeah.
though the situations are farcical and ridiculous. But the fact that we laugh because they give it their all and they play it as if they're playing Hamlet. And that's
Mm-hmm.
comedy, what you have to do. I mean, if you're doing it and you're kind of winking at the audience, I mean, yeah, it just doesn't play as right. But if you're playing it dead solid serious, that's where you really get the laughs, and you get. I mean, the difference between, I mean, in the theater, I've done a lot of farce in the theater,
Mm-hmm.
and the thing like what about farce is that you just have to play it, and you have to play it honestly and true. Don't try to be funny. You have to play it like Hamlet, and it's amazing the things that the audiences will laugh at. Like, I would be on stage and like, oh my God, they're laughing at that. And then of course, it's things, but that's the beauty of farce. If an audience goes along with it, and you got them in the palm of their hand, if you deliver it to them right. I mean, you look at theater. There's, I mean, so many farces that work, like Michael Frayn's Noise Is Off, or Ray Cooney's Run for Your Wife. All of them also, Michael Frayn has said that play sprung forth from, Howard Hawks,
Mm-hmm.
growing up watching, Howard Hawks, these movies in the theater. So they've kind of been passed down from generation to generation. And no, it's an interesting thing about, the state of comedy. Like, I often think of, like, a movie like, from 1938. Could this be done today, and could it be done the way Howard Hawks did it? Or would they go the route of a completely different style and school of comedy, which is like the Judd Apatow
Yeah.
way? Also very effective, but a very, very different, it's
Yeah.
not more, I don't know how to describe it. I guess it's a little more in your face, I guess, kind of comedy, if that makes any sense. Like,
Mm-hmm.
whereas, but it's interesting to think of, like, of a movie from 1938, if it would play well, if it were released brand new today in 2022.
Mm-hmm.
I think it would, because of the commitment of the performances, and and just the speed and the pacing of the piece.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think the greatness of this movie ultimately what what makes it endure. And it's like my first time. I know my first time watching Cary Grant was another one of his farces from this era, which was Arsenic and Old Lace.
Mm-hmm.
And that one's a bit more broad. It definitely plays more towards the winking at the camera, like you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And that makes something like this all the more unique. And I think one of the things that's great about this is that with Cary Grant's characters, like, every scene in this movie, it's I Roger Ebert liked to quote Howard Hawks, and when he said what would make a good movie, it was like 3 good scenes, no bad scenes, or 3 great scenes, no bad scenes. And he mentioned this in terms of his great review of The Big Sleep, which I love and is probably my favorite Howard Hawks movie. Sure. But with Bringing Up Baby, you have so many great moments, like the scenes on the golf course where they first meet, and he's trying to explain, no, you're playing my ball, and it's like, well, why it's and she's just continuing to play. She's just basically ignoring him, and then gets to the car, and then it gets, and logically speaking, it'd be hard to. I do think to a certain extent it would be hard to do a movie like this, because of the fact that I think to a certain extent audiences would have a hard time believing that Cary Grant's character would take the bone that he's been weighing for years up to Katharine Hepburn's apartment with him, and and basically putting it in danger. But you don't even think about it. It just works that well as a plot device, because it's like, oh, well, this is going to come into play, and
it just works. And the same thing, with the famous, the ripping of the back of Katharine Hepburn's dress, and and the way that they just they sort of glide out of the room.
Yeah,
I mean, as far as farce is hard to do on stage, and it's hard to do on screen, and unfortunately, it rarely works. Just because I don't know, like either an audience just doesn't buy it or the way it's sold. I mean, and from modern film audiences, I mean, Peter Bogdanovich did a wonderful homage to Howard Hawks in What's Up, Doc,
yeah.
which I think Barbara Streisand and Ryan O'Neal's best performances. But like that, and that, in the context of doing that, I think it was 1972 when that came out. That work had very wonderful similarities and winks to Bringing Up Baby. But when you think about it, if you run down the list of farce is really not done on film anymore for whatever reason. Either they think it maybe doesn't sell, but it's always interesting to revisit because it's so intricate and like timing and playing it too hard or playing it underplaying it too much. It's a hard thing to do. Like I said, I've done farces many times in the theater, and it feels new to me every time I do it because you just don't know if you're pushing too much, if you're not doing enough, but here Hawks was able to, I don't know, coax honesty out of the performances in farce, which is hard to do.
Well, and I mean, it helps that he's his film stars two of the greatest actors in movie history. But sure. I mean, also you think about him as a director. He crossed so many boundaries as far as how many genres he did. He did westerns, he did crime movies, he did comedies, he did epics, and all of the ones that I've seen of his, you definitely feel. I think it boils down to the fact that he always went for the honesty of the story. Whether it was something like this, whether it was something like The Big Sleep, whether even something like Land of the Pharaohs, which is not a great movie, but it still is. It's still an interesting epic to watch and to see him do that. And then you look at something like Scarface, which kind of has some of the same similarities in terms of tone as something like Bringing Up Baby, but also adheres very much to what the crime genre in the 30s and 40s looked like. Mm-hmm. And I mean, even in The Big Sleep, where you have the scenes with Bogey and Bacall, you have the scene where, they're on the phone together and they're like messing with the police and stuff like that. Yeah. And, it goes back to that same style of just rapid fire dialogue and just the way that the delivery happens. It's just absolutely fascinating to watch and to see him adapt that style from genre to genre.
And I mean, the thing is, Howard Hawks, I mean, if you were to look at his list of films, I mean, it's a long list of some of the great films of all time, and just that he was able to coax that rat-a-tat-tat, that honesty, that truth. Just, I mean, he was able to coax some of the best performances. He coaxed for John Wayne, Red River, one of his best performances. I mean, there was an honesty in that. So, but yeah, we could probably do a couple hours just on Howard Hawks.
Yeah. This movie, though, I love how it starts off. It starts off setting up I like how it starts off basically starts off telling you the story. I love the way exposition is treated in this movie because it's not treated like a chore. It's treated like just a natural part of this plot kicking in. Right. And, you find out about the bone. You find out the fact that he's about to get married. You find out, he needs money for the museum. And you find out, hey, look, the lawyer happens to be in the same place as Katharine Hepburn. I wonder if those two are connected somehow. And sure enough, they are. And, also, in addition to the performances of Hepburn and Grant, you also have to give credit to the animal wranglers who help deliver the performances of Baby and George, the leopard and the dog, because those two are just as crucial to the success of this movie as any of the actual performers are. Human performers are.
Well, and also, and I have to acknowledge, of course, one of my favorite all-time character actors is in this would be Mr. Barry Fitzgerald, who's wonderful as Aloysius, and of course, Robeson. I mean, there's just that's another thing about a lot of these movies of these periods, like what we discussed previously in The Grapes of Wrath. Like, there was a time when these character actors would just come back and they would pop in for like a scene or two, but they wouldn't have a lot of screen time or a lot of dialogue, but they'd be memorable. You would remember them. And like it was like the old thing that that's why I think I wish I was a character actor from the 30s and 40s in another life. I would have loved to have been a member of the Howard Hawks stock company or the Frank Capra or the John Ford, but it's always worth mentioning about just the great as Miss Hepburn and Mr. Grant were. It's always like a lot of these movies, they were just peppered with great supporting characters that just really
I mean, and you think about later when they're in prison and they're trying to get in contact with her mother, and it's like, oh no, or her aunt, and it's like, oh no, she's up in bed. She's up in bed. I don't have to worry about my niece. And it's like she's saying you don't have an aunt. It's like that it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but at the same time, it's just the way those situations unfold and the way that those narrative devices, because it all builds up to this idea that everything that they've been telling the officers is true, just not necessarily in the way that they expected, because it's like, oh wow, now there are two leopards on the run, and that's farce. Like there's always like miscommunication, mistaken identities, and just people who aren't listening, but everything is mistaken, and it's like, oh, and if you as the audience are like, oh God, it's just it's going to get worse before it gets better, and it's wonderful. Yeah, and I love that there's this one moment when they're at when they're at the house, and they're trying to find the bone and all of that stuff, and they're trying to keep this from her aunt, and there is a point where Katharine Hepburn reveals, oh no, this is all part of a plan for me. Like, this is all part of a plan because of the fact that I love him. And, it's just this one throwaway moment that is crucial to the entire film, because not only does everything that not only does it make everything that she's doing make much more sense, but also adds another layer to her character that, okay, she's not as daffy and as unpredictable as, I mean, she's still unpredictable. She just knows but she's not unpredictable for herself. She understands what she's doing.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Now it really, again, it just comes back to like the interplay between Cary Grant and Katharine Hepburn. And I could say also in the end, when the skeleton collapses, I could probably watch that about 10 times.
Oh yeah.
It's still funny. It's still, and that's the testament of like, you think of like, the comedies that, throughout the history of, Hollywood, like that are still that genuinely funny, like Bringing Up Baby, Some Like It Hot, or, The Nutty Professor, or what have you. It's still very, 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 very funny.
Yeah. Yeah. And, it's interesting how, at least in terms of some of the most memorable comedies, like farce seems to have been the basic structure of film comedy that really started to take shape after the silent era. Once dialogue started to come into movies, and it's like you had the great silent masters like Chaplin, like Keaton, like Lloyd, where all of that, obviously they didn't have dialogue, and in some cases like Chaplin didn't even use dialogue, but the way that they built their comedy is very specific to a certain extent, and to almost to an extent where you wouldn't have necessarily seen them try to do that in the 30s. I mean, in the 30s on. I mean, Chaplin and Keaton did it to a certain extent. Some of their movies, like The Cameraman and The Great Dictator for Chaplin, but at the same time, the approach to comedy had to shift with the addition of dialogue. And it's interesting that starting with movies like Duck Soup and this movie, and then His Girl Friday, and then leading up to stuff like and even What's Up Doc, you have this where most of the most beloved comedies from this era, that span of decades, really do belong to this slapstick farce school of comedy.
Oh, sure. And they tried to, I mean, this, like I said, is the gold standard, but then there were a lot of other farces that kind of came along. I mean, Arsenic and Old Lace, to a certain extent, which Frank Capra did in 46, has kind of not only the addition of farce, but also kind of a little bit of a murder mystery element in their comedy. But and there were a lot of imitators of Hawks, but the imitators, they were never really able to capture that, I don't know, that Hawks style, that rhythm. There's a music to, when you watch it, like I said, there's just a rhythm and there's just a music to farce that it's like jazz that it's fun to watch when it's successful.
Yeah, and you brought up Arsenic and Old Lace, bringing up adding the idea of a murder mystery, and certainly both of those ideas are very theatrical. I mean, if you're familiar with the idea of these murder mystery weekends where actors play out like Agatha Christie type murder mysteries, I mean, it's like those two do kind of go hand in hand, so it kind of makes sense. And then, almost concurrently, and I think this really did start with Wilder, and I mean, maybe not necessarily started with Wilder, but at least he took it into a new direction, which is the idea of dark comedy. Mm-hmm. And we talked about it a little bit with Sunset Boulevard, which has a lot of different genres in play. You kind of have the murder mystery, you have the Hollywood drama, you have the film noir, but you also have this level of dark comedy in the way that Norma Desmond's life has become, and the way William Holden comes into it. And he really, I mean, I think once he really started to come onto the stage as somebody who was exploring comedy on film, I think he's after Hawks, I feel like, to a certain extent, so the silent era, you had Chaplin, Keaton, Lloyd doing basically dominating comedy. In the 30s and 40s, you had stuff like the Marx Brothers, and you had Howard Hawks, who were really starting to bring a next evolution. Then you had Wilder, and then you started to have filmmakers who were inspired by Wilder, and then eventually it's weird the way the 70s and 80s the 80s completely took a completely different shift once you started to get teen comedies and then more mature ideas, for lack of a better term, like John Hughes. So
Well, I mean, and comedy is a hard, because it's hard to know, like, with the trends with comedy. I mean, with in the 40s, of course, with when there was more of a reliance on, dialogue, and there were some comedians, like you think of the films of Bob Hope, where, um, or the Road to pictures, which I think are a lot of fun, but they're movies that, they're adventure comedies, but the tongue planted firmly in cheek, and it was an excuse for, like, Bob Hope and Bing Crosby to, say witty and funny lines, and but they were movies that that kind of comedy were movies that, okay, we know that, like, we're not taking ourselves that seriously, we're just having a good time.
Mm.
Whereas that, and that kind of played through, like, all of Bob Hope's films, a lot of the comedies where it was just a kind of a showcase for him to, be incredibly funny, which he was. I'd say by very, very rarely, I can't really think of a lot of farces. I mean, Blake Edwards did The Great Race, I think, which was kind of
Mm.
an homage to farce in '65. Had the Great Pie Fight. It's not like there are just, I mean, like with anything, there are just different schools of comedy, and I
Well,
think,
well, and with Blake Edwards, and I can't believe I forgot, you have the Pink Panther movies with Peter
of
Sellers.
course, of course, yeah.
So, and it got me thinking. I think part of the reason farce kind of fell out of favor is the fact that it was with Mel Brooks, starting with the producers and then Blazing Saddles and Young Frankenstein. Farce basically turned into parodies, and where you would use parody to make fun of genres. And with, whether you're talking about TV show like Get Smart, which is very funny and very farcical, but it's also making fun of spy stuff. It's also, and then you see him with the producers, Blazing Saddles, Young Frankenstein. Then as you have like ZAZ come in with Airplane, and I mean this kind of goes into an extension with the discussion I had on parody films last year with Robert Yanis Jr. And it's one of those things where it's like, again, it's this weird evolution of a genre. And I mean, it's interesting to see how comedy did. But yeah, with Blake Edwards, and I can't believe I forgot the Pink Panther movies, because those are completely farce.
Oh, sure.
But yeah, no. Bringing up Baby, I mean, we haven't really talked about it. We haven't talked about it quite that much, but I mean, honestly, it's well worth checking out. It is a part of the Criterion collection, and I agree that ending is just absolutely wonderful, and it's absolutely perfect because of the fact that as soon as it's funny because of the fact that it pays off the romance that has blossomed between those two, but also pays off the chaotic nature of Susan. And
Yes.
because of the fact that it's like, oh, hey, she found his bone, but then the dinosaur skeleton just collapses. And it's like, well, that's obviously the natural ending to that story. But no, I mean, Howard Hawks is a fascinating filmmaker, and I'm starting to get back into some of his work that I've missed over the years, and it's been interesting. But yeah, Bringing Up Baby is one that I've just always really enjoyed. I was going to go in order of release, but I decided because we have talked about the silent era, we have talked about the evolution of genre in filmmaking. Why don't we talk about a film that deals with that very subject? In 1952, Singing in the Rain, directed by Stanley Donan and Gene Kelly. And the first thing I will say is I think this is wonderful that this movie basically turned the transition from silent to sound films into the ultimate expression of what a filmmaker can do with sound, which is the movie musical.
Absolutely. I mean, there are movies that, you pick a scene, and, whether it's the famous Singing in the Rain scene that Gene Kelly does, or the Make 'Em Laugh scene, the dizzying Donald O'Connor dance sequence. And I mean, it's just it's an extraordinary movie, and it's still also like, and it's one of these movies that just stands the test of time. And with Stanley, Donan, and Gene Kelly, and everybody involved, and it's a beautiful looking film, and the story that it tells, it's no, it holds up very, very well.
Yeah. I to a certain extent, I forgot just how joyous this movie is right from the opening credits. It's been a number of years since I think last time I'd seen this was shortly after Debbie Reynolds passed away. And so it's been a number of years. But it's just from the first moment, and I love that the thing that I kind of love about this movie is that, there are a lot of movies that are very nerdy about film. And, you associate that more with nowadays, where you look at films that look at the filmmaking process. I mean, even something as dark as like Brian De Palma's Blowout does this, and the sound design, but you also have movies like David Mamet's State and Maine, which is very much Hollywood comedy, but you also kind of feel like, and even something like Bowfinger, Frank Oz's Bowfinger with Steve Martin and A. Murphy, where it's like, you feel like even as a film fan, you're kind of learning about film production as you go along. It's interesting that one of the most acclaimed movies, and certainly probably the most acclaimed musical of all time, is very much a movie in that vein, because it does a really good job of explaining the way that Hollywood transitioned from silent to sound.
Absolutely, and how dramatic of a change it was. I mean, for how hard it was for actors. I mean, there was a very, very famous silent film actor, John Gilbert, who was this dashing leading man type, and then when the talkies came, nobody wanted to hire him, and that happened to a lot of actors. And I know that's something that underneath the surface for the Don Lockwood character, like, oh God, now that the talkies, like what, like, am I going to have a career? Like,
Yeah.
and that's very, very a real sentiment that a lot of actors and writers and directors had when that shift happened.
Yeah, and the thing that is, I think the first thing that is absolutely wonderful about this, one of the early scenes that really made me fall in love with this movie again was at the Hollywood premiere of their latest film together, and of Lockwood and Lamont's film together, and everybody's arriving, and Donald is the one speaking, so we don't hear Lamont's voice. And I love that choice to not really have anybody speaking is really kind of indicative of the fact that, the silent era, it's like you didn't necessarily know how these people with voices sounded.
Right.
And it's just such a really great touch. And of course, the comedic punchline is that Lena Lamont, Jane Hagen's character, has a absolutely atrocious voice, and it's like you would never cast her in a talkie, like, unless you were going for something very specifically comedic.
Sure.
And it's just such a wonderful choice that they did that, to really emphasize that this was the time period in Hollywood. And then I just love all of the little details about going into how Hollywood movies were made at the time, and the way that, the sets changed from when you were on a silent film where the director was free to talk throughout and give direction as the camera was rolling, to sound where it's like, they had to be in a booth for a while. So this is just pure delight moment one.
It really is, and like you said, it really does show that shift. Just of how hard it was, but obviously people managed, and then of course, then the innovations that came after, with things that you could do with the camera and with editing and all of that. No, this is very much a wonderful, fun, exciting, great script by Betty Comden and Adolph Green, and wonderful music, but also a really, I think, an incisive look into the shift in Hollywood.
Yeah.
And of course it still holds up, and it this is one of those movies that the joy of filmmaking and the joy of film viewing, like I think all three of the films that we're discussing, I think you see that, you watch these three movies, and you just can't find anything. There's just nothing wrong with it. And you see the joy that was made in the making of all of them. They're just how they're all intricately put together. It is interesting, Gene Hagen's performance, and of course Gene Hagen, playing up the voice and everything like that. Very, very funny.
Mm-hmm.
You go back and you read some modern day. I went back and I read some modern day reviews, and some of them spoke very, not unkindly of her. They thought, I think, that her performance was a little too over the top.
Yeah.
I don't feel that way. I thought, what they were trying to do, I think it works, and I think it is very, very funny. And there's actually, she's so she brings such humanity to the character, and of course she earned, I think she earned the film's sole acting Oscar nomination. I think it was, knowing from Gene Kelly's autobiography, that I think that he was always a little bothered that he didn't get a Best Actor Oscar nomination for this performance.
Yeah, he probably should. That is, I mean, she is terrific in this, and you're right about the fact that she really does bring a lot of heart to this character. And yeah, I mean, I can see how the voice can be grating, but at the same time, I don't know that I don't think I would say it's over the top, though, because of the fact that, I mean, I think at the time, what are you going to do with her voice? What else are you going to ask her to do with her voice to make it seem like, oh, she would never work in sound pictures?
Yeah.
How are you going to do that? But I do. The thing that is great about this is the fact that it's they really do, like you said. I mean, she's kind of treated as the villain in this because of the fact that, for a variety of reasons, because of the fact that she got Debbie Reynolds' character fired, the fact that she's trying to essentially blackmail the studio to keep her stardom going. Sure. But at the same time, they're also dubbing her voice after the fact without really telling her. So it's they're not treating her well either. Yeah. And it's an interesting, it's interesting how it kind of plays to some ideas of studio politics that unfortunately are still going on. It's we not just in terms of the treatment of women in Hollywood as far as their acting careers progress, but also just how we treat secondary performers, like the Kathy character, like Debbie Reynolds' character, who is essentially doing voiceover, and she's not getting the credit, and it's one of those things where it's this movie works because of the fact that it's just so damn entertaining. The musical numbers are wonderful. the way Donan uses the camera and choreography, and the way he edits and shoots the musical moments are just absolutely delightful. I mean, of course, the performers as well. And but also the fact that this is a movie where I think even Donan is a very successful. He had a really strong career as well. He also did Seven Brides for Seven Brothers, which my wife loves. He did Charade, which my mother loves, and I mean I love it too. But he just did a lot of really wonderful He did some really lovely work. I mean we think so much about Gene Kelly in terms of Singing in the Rain, but I mean, really, Stanley Donan's directing is as important to the success of this movie as what Kelly brings as a performer and choreographer as well.
Absolutely. Now, Stanley Donan is one of those directors, that you don't. In the discussion of the great directors, his name doesn't come up quite enough. I mean, you think of all of the, just the variety of the movies that he's done. I mean, of course, all On the Town, and I think all of the musicals that he did, and Royal Wedding is another one that comes to mind, off the top of my head. And he had a long, long, long career, and of course, I think there are people who think that Gene Kelly directed more than 50% of the movie. I mean, there's always going to be those kinds of arguments. I mean, obviously Gene Kelly did the choreography, but Stanley Donan, like, his touch is very, very much the film as it is in all of his films.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, if you are a geek about the filmmaking process and you haven't seen Singing in the Rain, first of all, I believe it's available on HBO Max, so feel free to do so. But this really is, I think, a very underrated film when it comes to the look of film and the look behind the camera as far as filmmaking. And because of those ways that it shows the start of the sound era with the diction coaches, with the ways that they had to record the sound, the way the sound would be recorded if you move too far away from the camera. And it's one of those things where it's like there's so many of those devices in terms of sound mixing that are easy to duplicate now, and you could easily make a joke out of it now. But you think about the fact that they had to do that in real time in the 50s, it's because this was really before surround sound came into play.
Sure.
And it's just such a delightful film, and it really, there aren't a whole lot of Debbie Reynolds films that I'm familiar with, but this is one where you really see just she is a wonderful presence right off the bat as soon as Gene Kelly gets into that car with her, and it just doesn't, and she's just so delightful in this, and the way that she is very much a collaborator with Kelly and O'Connor in their sequences together. It's just absolutely wonderful.
No, and she's delightful, and she just had a wonderful presence, like not only in this, but of course, a lot of her famous roles, like the unsinkable Molly Brown, no, she in this is it like you said, it's across the board. The movie is just it's a delight. I mean, there'd have to be something wrong with you if you didn't like this movie.
Yeah, it's really wonderful. And it did make me want to, rewatching this does make me want to go back and start to really fill in some blanks as far as the great American musicals from this era, because I do think this was probably the best era the musical had.
and and Stanley Donan, like you figure he did Funny Face and The Pajama Game, and he co-directed the film version of Damn Yankees. I mean, he was really at the forefront of a lot of those big, very successful musicals. I mean, in the
Mm-hmm.
'50s, like that's when the musicals were really, really popular, and in the '60s, it kind of sort of, you had My Fair Lady and The Sound of Music, and then I think then after The Sound of Music, you started to hear more about how much the musicals cost, and it was costing the studios, and
Yeah.
less about, and of course, like how much money that the movies didn't make, unfortunately. And then, the musicals kind of, you know, died out, I guess, in a way, like the kinds of musicals that Stanley Don and certainly the kinds of musicals that, like, Singin' in the Rain is.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean it basically since that era of since the 60s it's like you really have seen like very dramatic ebbs and flows in the musical genre. It's like for the most part it's been largely dormant. And it's funny because we had like three or four musicals at least in the past year alone between In the Heights, between West Side Story, and between Tick Tick Boom. And
Mm-hmm.
it's interesting to see the ways in which musicals like that borrow from the classics. It's funny because I would say, something like Tick Tick Boom, which is much more insular, which is much more reflective of the genre. Nonetheless, I still think borrows quite a bit from that early genre and stuff like Singing in the Rain. You think about some of
Sure.
those sequences in Tick Tick Boom, and they arguably have more in common with the classic musicals than In the Heights does, which feels like a traditional musical and arguably more of a traditional musical outside of like West Side Story, which obviously is a new adaptation of that one. Um,
I think Tick Tick Boom was very much a love letter to musicals, musical theater, musical films, to the classics. So yeah, I think definitely, and that's Lin Manuel Miranda's, like, his hand, like leading the way on that. That wonderful sequence in the diner with all of the legends of Broadway.
mm,
That was yeah. Now that was definitely like a nice little homage, like not just to Broadway, but to I think all musicals.
yeah. So we are going to now close with 1948's The Treasure of the Sierra Madre, and which is probably my favorite John Huston film. I love The Maltese Falcon. I've seen The Maltese Falcon on the big screen twice. I've been fortunate enough to be able to say that. I have seen some of his other films. This one is easily my favorite, and it comes down to the performance by Humphrey Bogart as Fred C. Dobbs. And this is I I love that this one, like, we're all three of these movies are essentially genre movies. It's like Bringing Up Baby is a romantic comedy, Singing in the Rain, obviously a musical. Treasure of the Sierra Madre really is an old school adventure film. Like, and it's interesting to see that really, because I mean, of course it's a drama. Of course it's a psychological film, but it's also an adventure in
Oh
a
yeah.
big way because of the fact that it's essentially one character. It's essentially a character going on a journey. That's what it is,
Hmm.
and this is the, and I love the way that Houston plays that up. Like, this is, it's like I in my review of it that I wrote several years ago. It's like there are ways that I was likening John Huston to Akira Kurosawa, and I mean they both were contemporaries. They both were working at the same time, but at the same time you can tell that there's a way that they approach genre in their own ways that I think really set the template for the genre. For I mean, certainly Kurosawa's influence is legendary. I mean, Seven Samurai, Seven Samurai, Hidden Fortress, inspiring Star Wars, Yojimbo, all of those. But with John Huston, I think you can look at something like Treasure of Sierra Madre, and you can see as in its own way, like the blueprint for something like an Indiana Jones, or even something like The Lost City this year. Now, granted, it's more serious than The Lost City, but it's still this adventure taking you into the wilderness and putting obstacles in your direction.
And one of the things, and this is also my favorite John Huston film as well, what the movie does still so well was that it points to the audience is that if you were in their situation, you would do this, you would probably act the same way, like the greed and the things that that we do for gold, I mean, it's I think it really does, Indiana Jones. I think that's a really good, especially The Last Crusade. Everybody they just want that little piece of the pie. And again, it's like if you have two partners, well, when it comes down to it, it's like, well, I don't want them to have the piece. I want it all for myself. So I mean, it's just a wonderful and. It really, I mean, I probably haven't seen this in 25 years, and it does have moments of comedy, especially from Walter Huston, who is wonderful. Probably Walter Huston, I mean, one of the great performances of all time, and and it's just, it's one of those performances that kind of like the hair on the back of your neck stand, because it's just it's so good. And of course, Bogart and Tim Holt. But the thing that really sells this movie still, I mean, a movie from 1946, is that the audiences can relate to that. Yeah, if I were in that situation, I'd want it all for myself too.
Yeah.
That greed. And Huston knew that. And that was something that traveled through all of his films, The Asphalt Jungle, especially, just that desire. I want it all for myself, and I'll sell my soul for that the gold, or that piece of the good life. Because I mean, Fred C. Dobbs, he's already hit the bottom.
Yeah,
he can't go any further. So he wants desperation, and he wants it all. And this is another one with Bogart. I mean, Bogart and Huston made many, many, many films together, and they just, I mean, I think Bogart was really the perfect actor for John Huston, because of course they were hard living, they drank together, they partied together, they had a good time, and that sense of adventure. And and also I think Bogart, I think the reason why Bogart was so strong in this part as well, because it kind of relates to Bogart, the person. He was a bit player in Hollywood for a number of years. He was kind of playing, kind of second banana kind of roles. And then, the Petrified Forest happened, where he was able to shine and break out on his own. And so and he clung his way to the top of Hollywood, and he eventually, of course, got there. And that's, that desire. And that's something that I think that when he played Fred C. Dobbs, he can relate to, that desire to show that he was better than, second banana kind of sporting parts in a lot of the gangster movies that he did, which he did very, very well in. It's interesting watching Bogart in early films and then later films, but this is, I think, one of his best.
Yeah,
it's just another example of Bogart. There's a lot of silences in the movie where you can see in the eyes of him looking at Tim Holt, and Tim Holt looking at him, and just, I know what you're thinking. And that's brilliant, setting up the scene from John Huston, of just ratcheting up the tension, I think that's like it's filled with like adventure, and the tension is always there because again like that audience relatability of like if we were in that situation we would probably be the same way.
Yeah. No, and I mean this is just such a wonderfully stripped down story by Huston and his screenplay, and I think the thing that works is the fact that Dobbs is beaten down in life. He's
Mhm.
not none of these main three are bad people. Like you just see the effect of the combination of the possibility of having all this gold to yourself as well as the elements. Because I mean the elements and the fact that they're alone in a country that is not their own, I think plays a huge part into
That's
this.
kind of another character. Yeah, it's another
And
character.
it's sort of it's one of those things that's just really really intelligent on Houston's part, because it's like if there are some filmmakers who would just if you were going to adapt this, you would probably try to overcomplicate it, and sort of the I think I hate to say it because I still enjoy the movies, but it's like I think it's the difference between The Hobbit as the book, the Tolkien book, versus The Hobbit and the Peter Jackson movies, where
Mhm.
it's like the book is very stripped down. It's very you get the essentials of what the story is. You can get continuous push forward to what that story is, and
Mhm.
then but the Peter Jackson movies, by making it three movies, it sort of it takes the focus off of what focused the the story, the original story. And I
Mhm.
can see if a filmmaker tried to adapt this now, they would probably be lured into taking their focus off the main story. And I love
Expanding.
that I love that you have these moments in the film, like you have the drifter that Curtin meets, who comes up and basically throws a wrench into things and say, okay, well, you have a choice. You can either let me be a part of this, or you can, tell me you go away, in which case you're probably going to get caught. Or you can kill
Mhm.
me, but if you kill me, you have a choice to make in terms of how that's going to play out, because if one of you do it, then the other two have blackmail over you. But if you all do it together, without really a sense of who did it, you guys are clear. And just and then you have this idea of Walter Houston's character, who basically is who basically has an opportunity to go and help people, and he does, and that ratchets up the tension even more, because not only is
Yeah.
his stuff with Dobbs and Curtin, but if Dobbs and Curtin all of a sudden become more and more unhinged. And the thing that really connected with me so much more this time watching it for this record was Tim Holt's performance. He's kind of like the forgotten person in this
Yeah.
movie. He's really effective because of the fact that you see the dynamic, that you see the friendship that he gets in with Dobbs, because of the
Mhm.
fact that they find themselves in the same situation. They also find themselves in the same predicament than when they beat up McCormick when he can't produce their money. And then you see the friendship and the ways that they learn off of Howard, the Walter Houston character. And but at the same time, as they're starting to find more and more gold, you see those cracks starting to show.
Sure.
And just the slow burn of that psychological aspect of it is just absolutely wonderful to watch in this film.
Yeah, it really is. Tim Holt, I don't know if he acted much after this movie. I mean, I know he died relatively young, but I think he did a lot of like B movies. But this was certainly like the most popular movie, and
Hmm.
it's an underrated performance because like Bogart, like him, the wonderful thing that a lot of unspoken is that you just see that
Yeah.
the desperation and the mistrust and the greed and all of that. And I think that's one of the reasons why that this movie has remains a classic is that again that relatability and the effectiveness of like like you said like the elements are another character. So they're not only they're against that they're against they're against time because they might have they may have limited resources like water and food and things like that. And there's also just that I don't trust you. I don't trust
Hmm.
like that I'm not gonna close my eyes because I'm afraid that I'm not gonna wake up again. I mean
Yeah.
that's it. No, it's effective. I would hate in this day and age of like where everybody's remaking anything. I would be disappointed if they remade a
Yeah.
movie like this because they would attempt to like stretch it out. And it's whenever I see that happen, it's kind of like you try to improve what does not need to be improved. I mean,
Hmm.
so it's like I thankfully hope leave this one alone.
Yeah. Well, and then you also have the bandits that show up
Oh
who don't need no stinking badges, as this is often misquoted. Um,
yeah.
and it's funny because of the fact that it's like I certainly had that quote in my head before I saw the movie, and you realize that it's not the right way of saying it. And
Right.
but the thing is, you look at the way that they say it in the movie, is not only it's not only a better line, it's a funnier line too, because of the fact that it's like it just builds up to the point where they say we don't need no stinking badges, or we don't need to show you our stinking badges.
Yeah.
And the way that that builds up, and the way that this climax builds up too, it's like you once it's like Howard was the person that was the glue that was holding these trio together,
Hmm.
because he understood and he knows what this will do to people. And once he leaves, it basically becomes a matter. It basically really only becomes a matter of time when Dobbs snaps, and we do think it's probably going to be Dobbs who snaps because he's shown more likely that that's going to be the scenario that plays out.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things also that the movie shows is that that you see like the desperation of Dobbs that he is willing to kill for this is that Houston winks to the audience is that that is within all of us.
Yeah.
That kind of mentality it is within all of us. If we were if you are really down the way that Dobbs and Curtin is, the things that you're willing to do, excuse me, to get that that the gold or whatever idol it is that you're after. And that I mean again all you got to do is just watch it. You just look at Bogart's eyes and you just see that internal rage, and it's good.
Well, and it's funny because of the fact that it's like you think about the Maltese Falcon, which
Oh
is
yeah.
very much in the same vein of that, just in the nature of film noir, as opposed
Hmm.
to an adventure. And I mean, even Casablanca is like that too, because everybody's after the letters of transit.
Hmm.
It's that MacGuffin issue that's at
Sure.
play, where it's like every what are the people after in this movie,
Hmm.
and in this case it's gold. And it's one of those things where I think the reason part of the reason that this is my favorite Johnny Houston movie, other than the fact that it's just really entertaining and probably the best collaboration he had with Bogart, is the fact that it really makes this situation, which right now is not necessarily a situation anybody would be in. But at the same time, it's tapping into those elemental aspects of greed and paranoia and anxiety. I mean, even if you think about the Safdie brothers' Uncut Gems, is the same kind of thing with Adam Sandler's
Oh,
character. Now
sure.
that's a different addiction. That's an addiction to gambling that gets him in trouble, but it's the same. It's the same elemental emotions.
Well, and they're all morality tales. I mean, they're all kinds of things. What are you willing to do? What are you willing to sacrifice? Are you willing to sacrifice your morals, your humanity, your you know, your laws of like of fairness or what have you to get whatever this is or to whatever to solve this problem? Are you willing to kill,
Yeah.
and can you live with that? And that's those are all like I think just really really important questions and things that have made a lot of movies, especially movies that John Huston made. I think that was like always the big issue, like a thing that he was always addressing in a lot of his movies, especially in you know Maltese Falcon or this film or the Asphalt Jungle and many of the other. The Under the Volcano was another one that comes to mind. You know, just a lot of movies that like of characters that of a moral center that if at first they have a strong moral center and then this thing is dangling in front of them that what are they willing to do, and that's that to get it,
Yeah.
or are they willing to and that's all things that again that all of us can relate to.
Mm-hmm.
Are we willing to sacrifice our morals and our ethics and our humanity for that?
No, absolutely. And yeah, I cannot recommend Treasure of Sierra Madre enough. It's one of the best films I've ever seen. It's like I said, it's my favorite John Huston one. And I mean all of these that we're talking about today are just really well worth it. And hopefully one of the things that we've done in this discussion is we've sort of painted a picture of not only what these meant in the context of the time they were made, but also where you see their influences moving forward. Mm-hmm. And all three of these filmmakers. I mean, I think I think Huston's probably arguably the most acclaimed of the three that we've talked about. I mean, certainly Hawks is well esteemed. Donan, I think, kind of gets forgotten because of his collaborators, because and it was a joke for a long time that Charade was the best film that Hitchcock never made. Although it's a wonderful example of the Hitchcockian form, but it's very much a Stanley Donan film too. When you watch it, I think one of the things that's so great about each of these films is they, in a way, they're very much touchstones of the genres that they're in. Mm-hmm. And I think really, if you're a fan of these genres, if you're a fan of these actors, certainly be sure to watch them if you haven't already. But if you're a fan of these genres, I mean, it's almost essential to watch all of these.
If I think without Treasure of the Sierra Madre, I don't think there's an Indiana Jones. I don't think there's a lot of those kinds of adventure. I mean, films looking for gold. Musicals. I mean, like again, in each of these genres, many of these films are the gold standard of their respective genre. Singin' in the Rain is probably, if it's not the greatest movie musical, it's certainly in the top 5. Bringing Up Baby is up, I think, in the top 5, top 10 of the greatest comedies ever made. And Treasure of the Sierra Madre is, I think, of adventure and of this kind of, adventure, the quest for, a prize or a gold or, it's every movie that of that genre that came afterwards sprung from the tree of that wonderful John Huston movie.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Tim, once again, thank you very much for joining me to talk about some older movies. I've really enjoyed these discussions. I'm looking forward to the next time that we talk.
Always a pleasure, Brian. Thank you for having me.
I'd like to thank Tim for joining me on the podcast today. It's always great to talk to him. We will have more established classics later on in the year. I've already got 3 in mind I'm looking forward to talking to him about. That's going to be it for this episode of the Sonic Cinema Podcast. Like I teased, I've got some really great guests and really great ideas for topics coming up. A lot of return guests, and hopefully a couple of first timers. You can check us out at Sonic Cinema Podcasts on YouTube, Apple, Google, Spotify, and elsewhere. You can also check me out at patreon.com/Sonic Cinema. And also, I have finished composing my first feature-length film score. It's for Brian Ackley's Player PhD. If Brian's name is familiar, he's been on the podcast several times. We've talked about his work. We've talked about other people's work. It's been really great to collaborate with him on this project. I'm looking forward to people seeing it and hearing it. That's going to be it for this episode of the Sonic Cinema Podcast. And be sure to check us out, as always, on www.sonic-cinema.com.